Since America resumed executions in 1976, only 17 women have taken that final walk to the death chamber. But right now, 8 women are living on borrowed time because they shattered every boundary of human decency. We're not talking about desperate housewives who poisoned abusive husbands or teenage mothers who snapped under pressure. These women methodically planned executions that were so brutal, so calculated, and so devoid of mercy that seasoned detectives still wake up screaming from nightmares about what they witnessed at those crime scenes. Their final appeals are running out, their execution dates are being scheduled, and soon America will witness something that happens less than once per decade. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Inquiry for more cases that redefine American justice. Antoinette Frank, the badge that became a license to kill. She wore the same uniform as the men and women who risked their lives to protect others. But on March 4th, 1995, New Orleans police officer Antoinette Frank transformed her badge from a symbol of justice into an instrument of terror. What drove a sworn protector to become one of Louisiana's most notorious killers? 24-year-old Antoinette had been a police officer for barely 2 years when she orchestrated a robbery that would leave 3 people dead and shock the nation. Her target wasn't a random convenience store or bank. She chose a Kimon restaurant in New Orleans East, a family-owned Vietnamese establishment where she had worked part-time as security. The plan was devastatingly simple in its betrayal. Antoinette knew the restaurant's layout, security measures, and operating procedures. She understood when cash would be available and when the fewest witnesses would be present. Most crucially, she knew that her police uniform would provide perfect cover for what she was planning. But Antoinette didn't plan to work alone. She recruited Rogers Lacaze, an 18-year-old with whom she had developed a relationship that crossed every professional boundary a police officer should maintain. Lacaze wasn't just her accomplice. He was her weapon, the person who would pull triggers while she maintained a fiction of being an officer responding to a robbery in progress. On that March evening, Antoinette arrived at Kimon restaurant with Lacaze, ostensibly to check on the establishment during her off-duty security work. What happened next transformed a routine evening into a massacre that would make national headlines and force New Orleans to confront corruption within its police department. The first victim was Officer Ronald Williams, Antoinette's partner and fellow police officer who had arrived at the restaurant independently. Williams had no idea that his partner had orchestrated the robbery. He thought he was responding to. When he entered the restaurant, Antoinette shot him in the back of the head with his own service weapon, killing him instantly. 2 restaurant employees, siblings Ha and Quang Vu, became the next victims. They had witnessed Antoinette's betrayal of her partner and represented the only obstacles to her escape. Both were executed to eliminate witnesses to what had already become a triple homicide. The robbery netted a few $100s. 3 lives have been ended for pocket change and the twisted satisfaction of betraying every oath Antoinette had taken as a police officer. But Antoinette had miscalculated one crucial detail. Chow Vu, another employee, had hidden in a restaurant cooler during the attack. She survived to provide testimony that would expose Antoinette's role in orchestrating the entire conspiracy. Police launched an investigation that quickly focused on Antoinette herself. The evidence was overwhelming once investigators began examining her relationships, financial situation, and presence at the crime scene. Her story about responding to a robbery began falling apart within hours of questioning. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. The case against Antoinette was built on eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and the undeniable fact that she had used a position as a police officer to facilitate murder. Her defense attorney struggled to explain away the mountain of evidence, proving their client had violated every principle of law enforcement. In September 1995, a jury convicted Antoinette of 3 counts of first-degree murder. They rejected her defense team's arguments about mental health issues and environmental factors that might have influenced her actions. The evidence was too clear, the betrayal too complete, and the violence too calculated for any mitigating factors to matter. The jury sentenced her to death, making her one of the few women on Louisiana's death row. Rogers Lacaze was also convicted and sentenced to death for his role in the murders, though his case would follow a different trajectory through the appeals process. Antoinette's case became a symbol of police corruption and the devastating consequences when those sworn to protect become predators instead. Her story forced New Orleans to examine its police recruitment, training, and oversight procedures while grappling with how someone entrusted with badge and gun could commit such calculated acts of violence. For nearly 3 decades, Antoinette has remained on Louisiana's death row while her appeals wind through federal courts. Her case continues to raise questions about police corruption, the death penalty's application to law enforcement officers, and whether the justice system can adequately address crimes committed by those sworn to uphold it. The Kim on restaurant murders remain one of New Orleans' most shocking crimes, not just because of the brutality, but because they shatter the fundamental trust between police and community that makes civilized society possible. Erica Yvonne Sheppard, the teenager who became a killer, 18 years old. Most teenagers at that age are planning college, working summer jobs, or simply figuring out who they want to become. But on June 30th, 1993, Erica Yvonne Sheppard chose a different path. She decided to commit a crime so brutal that it would land her on Texas death row and make her one of the youngest women ever sentenced to execution in America. Marilyn Marr was 43 years old when she encountered Erica outside a Houston shopping center. The meeting wasn't accidental. Erica had been looking for a victim, someone she could rob and eliminate without leaving witnesses. Marilyn's isolated location and apparent vulnerability made her the perfect target for what Erica was planning. But what began as a robbery quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Erica didn't just want Marilyn's possessions. She wanted to ensure that no one would survive to identify her or testify about what had happened. The decision to eliminate witnesses would transform a robbery into capital murder. Erica forced Marilyn into her own vehicle and drove to a remote location where she could complete her crime without interference. The isolation wasn't chosen randomly. Erica understood that what she was planning required privacy and time to ensure her victim couldn't escape or summon help. The attack that followed was characterized by extreme violence that shocked even experienced investigators. Marilyn wasn't simply killed. She was subjected to prolonged brutality that suggested her attacker took pleasure in inflicting suffering beyond what was necessary to complete a robbery. Forensic evidence revealed that Marilyn had been beaten, stabbed, and tortured before death finally ended her suffering. The crime scene told a story of calculated cruelty that went far beyond the requirements of robbery or even murder. Police launched an investigation that quickly focused on the victim's final known whereabouts and anyone who might have had contact with her on the day of her death. Witness testimony and physical evidence began pointing toward Erica within days of the murder. When authorities arrested Erica, the evidence against her was overwhelming. DNA testing, fingerprint analysis, and witness identification created an unbreakable chain connecting her to Marilyn's death. Her youth didn't diminish the brutality of her crime or the calculated nature of her actions. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that the extreme violence and calculated nature of the crime warranted capital punishment despite Erica's age. They presented evidence of premeditation, torture, and callous disregard for human life that made her eligible for execution under Texas law. Her 1995 trial revealed the extent of violence Marilyn had endured in her final hours. Medical examiners testified about multiple injuries inflicted over an extended period, suggesting that death was preceded by prolonged torture that served no purpose other than the perpetrator's sadistic satisfaction. The jury convicted Erica of capital murder and sentenced her to death. At 19, she became one of the youngest women ever condemned in Texas, joining death row at an age when most people are just beginning their adult lives. Erica's case raised complex questions about juvenile justice, even though she was legally an adult when she committed her crime. Her youth became the foundation for appeals arguing that executing someone for crimes committed as a teenager violated constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. For nearly 3 decades, Erica has remained on Texas death row while her case moves through federal appeals courts. Her attorneys continue arguing that her age at the time of the crime should preclude execution, while prosecutors maintain that the calculated brutality she inflicted on her victim justifies the death penalty regardless of her youth. The case represents one of Texas's most controversial capital punishment decisions, highlighting ongoing debates about age, maturity, and the capacity for rehabilitation among young offenders who commit the most serious crimes. Marilyn Marr's murder remains a stark reminder of how random violence can destroy innocent lives and how some criminals, regardless of their age, commit acts of such calculated brutality that society demands the ultimate penalty in response. Wendi Elizabeth Andriano, the Angel of Death. October 8th, 2000 should have been just another quiet evening in their Watuki apartment. Instead, it became the night Wendi Andriano revealed that sometimes the greatest danger to a dying man comes not from his disease, but from the woman who promised to love him in sickness and in health. Jo Andriano was 33 years old and fighting a losing battle against a rare form of bone cancer. His prognosis was grim. Doctors had given him 3 months to live. His body was failing, his pain was constant, and his medical bills were mounting. But Jo had something many terminal patients don't have: insurance. Life insurance worth a substantial sum that would provide financial security for his wife after his death. Wendi had been playing a devoted caregiver for months. She accompanied Jo to his medical appointments, managed his medications, and presented herself to friends and family as the loving wife standing by her husband during his darkest hour. But behind the facade of devotion, Wendi was growing impatient. 3 months felt like an eternity when a life insurance payout was waiting. That October evening, Wendi decided she had waited long enough. Jo returned home from another painful day of treatment, his body weakened by chemotherapy and his spirit worn down by the relentless progression of his disease. He trusted his wife completely, never imagining that the woman caring for him was actually calculating the shortest path to his insurance money. Wendi's first attempt was poison. She mixed sodium azide into Jo's drinks, a chemical compound that can cause respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. For someone already weakened by cancer treatment, it should have been enough. Jo became violently ill, his body rejecting the toxic substance even as it fought cancer. But he didn't die. The poison failed to finish what the cancer had started. Frustrated by the failed poisoning, Wendi escalated to direct violence. She retrieved a wooden bar stool and began bludgeoning her husband's head. Jo was too weak from illness and poisoning to defend himself effectively. Blow after blow rained down on his skull as he fought desperately to survive an attack from the person he trusted most. When the bar stool broke from the repeated impacts, Wendi wasn't finished. She grabbed a 13-inch kitchen knife and plunged it deep into Jo's neck, severing his spinal cord. The man who had survived months of chemotherapy, radiation, and aggressive cancer treatment died not from his disease, but from 23 blows to the head and a knife wound inflicted by his wife. Police arrived to find Wendi's carefully constructed story already in place. She claimed unknown intruders had broken into their apartment, attacked Jo, and fled before she could help him. Her performance was detailed and emotional, complete with tears and trauma that would have convinced anyone who didn't know the medical evidence. But forensic investigators quickly unraveled Wendi's deception. The sodium azide poisoning was revealed through toxicology tests. The pattern of head injuries told a story of prolonged, methodical beating. The knife wound showed precision and intent. Most damaging to Wendi's intruder theory was the complete absence of any evidence supporting forced entry or robbery. The investigation revealed a woman who had grown tired of waiting for nature to take its course. Jo's cancer would have killed him within months, but those months represented delays in accessing his life insurance payout. Wendi had calculated that murder was more efficient than mourning. Police charged Wendi with first-degree murder. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that killing a terminally ill spouse for insurance money represented one of the most callous forms of betrayal possible. The victim was defenseless, trusting and already dying. The motive was purely financial greed. During her trial, Wendi's defense attorneys argued that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression related to her husband's illness. They claimed the stress of caregiving had pushed her beyond rational thought. Mental health experts testified about the psychological pressure faced by caregivers dealing with terminal illness. The jury rejected the mental health defense. They saw through the claims of stress-induced temporary insanity to the calculated nature of the poisoning attempt, followed by brutal physical violence. This wasn't a momentary breakdown. This was premeditated murder designed to accelerate an insurance payout. On November 18, 2004, Wendi was convicted of first-degree murder. A month later, on December 22nd, she was sentenced to death. The jury concluded that aggravating factors, including the particularly cruel nature of killing a terminally ill spouse, outweighed any mitigating circumstances. Wendi Andriano joined Arizona's death row as one of only 3 women facing execution in the state. Her appeals have been repeatedly denied, with the Arizona Supreme Court upholding her conviction in 2007. She remains imprisoned at the Lumley Unit in the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. Jo Andriano would have died from cancer within 3 months of his murder. Instead, he died from 23 blows to the head and a knife wound to the neck, killed by the woman who had promised to care for him until death parted them. Wendi chose immediate financial gain over allowing her husband to die with dignity, transforming herself from caregiver into executioner in pursuit of insurance money that was already coming her way. Linda Anita Carty, the British citizen's American nightmare, a grandmother. On any other day, Linda Carty's credentials would have suggested respectability and stability. But May 16th, 2001 transformed this Caucasian American woman into the only British citizen sitting on death row in the United States, facing execution for a crime so twisted it defied comprehension, murdering a young mother to steal her newborn baby. At 42, Linda had spent years building what appeared to be a stable life in Houston, Texas. She had worked as a teacher, raised children, and maintained relationships within her community. But beneath the surface of normalcy, Linda was harboring a dangerous delusion that would cost one woman her life and destroy multiple families forever. Linda's relationship with her common-law husband was deteriorating. She believed that presenting him with a baby would save their failing relationship and provide the fresh start she desperately wanted. This was an unusual fantasy for women experiencing relationship difficulties. What made Linda different was her willingness to kill to make the fantasy real. Joanna Rodriguez was 20 years old and had just given birth to a baby boy. She lived in the same Houston neighborhood as Linda, making her a convenient target for a woman who had already decided that someone else's child would become her own. Joanna was young, vulnerable, and completely unaware that her neighbor was planning to destroy her family. The attack was meticulously planned. Linda recruited 3 accomplices, Gerald Anderson, Carlos Williams, and Crispin Green. These weren't random associates. They were men who understood that Linda was offering them money to participate in kidnapping and murder. The conspiracy revealed a level of premeditation that prosecutors would later use to argue for the death penalty. On that May afternoon, Linda and her accomplices invaded Joanna's home. They bound the young mother with duct tape, covering her nose and mouth in a way that would slowly suffocate her while keeping her alive long enough to complete their plan. This wasn't a quick killing. This was prolonged torture designed to terrorize a new mother while her infant son watched helplessly. The kidnappers took both Joanna and her 3-day-old baby, transporting them in the trunk of a car. Joanna was conscious during the journey, aware that she was being separated from her newborn and unable to protect him. The psychological torture was as deliberate as the physical violence that would follow. Linda's plan required Joanna's death to eliminate the only witness who could identify the baby's true parentage. While her accomplices drove, Linda made a decision that would place her on death row. She ensured that the duct tape remained positioned over Joanna's nose and mouth until the young mother suffocated in the trunk, her life ending in darkness while her baby cried nearby. When authorities discovered Joanna's body, they also found her infant son alive but traumatized. The baby had survived the kidnapping but lost his mother to a woman who saw murder as an acceptable solution to relationship problems. Linda's fantasy of presenting a baby to save her relationship had cost an innocent woman her life. The investigation moved swiftly. Gerald Anderson confessed and identified Linda as a mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. His testimony revealed that Linda had orchestrated every aspect of the crime, from selecting the victim to planning the method of murder. She wasn't a reluctant participant or a victim of manipulation. She was the architect of Joanna Rodriguez's death. Police arrested Linda at her home, where she was caring for the kidnapped infant as if he were her own child. Her performance as a new mother was as calculated as everything else she had done. She presented herself to neighbors and family as someone who had just given birth, maintaining the deception even as investigators were unraveling the truth. Federal prosecutors charged Linda with kidnapping resulting in death, a capital offense that carries the possibility of execution. The case generated international attention because of Linda's British citizenship and the involvement of multiple defendants who were willing to testify against her in exchange for lighter sentences. During her 2002 trial, Linda maintained her innocence with unwavering consistency. She claimed that her co-defendants had framed her because she had previously worked as an informant for law enforcement. Her defense argued that drug dealers had orchestrated the crime and falsely implicated her to settle old scores. The jury rejected Linda's claims of innocence. The evidence against her was overwhelming once her accomplices provided detailed testimony about her role as conspiracy's mastermind. Anderson's confession included specific details about Linda's planning and motivation that prosecutors used to establish premeditation and deliberate cruelty. On February 19, 2002, Linda was convicted of kidnapping resulting in death. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection, making her the only British citizen on American death row. Her case immediately attracted attention from international human rights organizations and British government officials concerned about a British citizen facing execution. Linda's appeals have continued for over 2 decades. Her most recent petition to the United States Supreme Court was denied in November 2018, but she continues to file legal challenges arguing that her British citizenship was not properly recognized during her arrest and trial. International law requires notification of consular officials when foreign nationals are arrested, a requirement that Linda's supporters claim was violated. The case has generated documentaries, newspaper coverage, and diplomatic discussions between British and American officials. Linda remains on death row in Texas, one of only 6 women facing execution in the state. Her supporters continue arguing that she was framed by co-defendants who received lighter sentences in exchange for their testimony. Linda Carty transformed a young mother's joy into tragedy, stealing not just a life, but the future that Joanna Rodriguez would never have with her son. Whether driven by relationship desperation or criminal calculation, Linda made choices that place her among the most reviled criminals in American justice system history, facing execution as the only British citizen on death row. Kimberly Diane Cargill, the silencer. June 18, 2010 should have been just another day in White House, Texas. Instead, it became the night Kimberly Cargill proved that some people will kill to keep their secrets, transforming a mentally disabled babysitter into a victim whose only crime was agreeing to tell the truth in court. Cherry Walker was 39 years old and mentally challenged. She worked as a babysitter for children in her East Texas community, including Kimberly's son. Cherry's intellectual disabilities made her trusting and vulnerable, but they also made her honest. When Child Protective Services needed someone to testify about what they had witnessed in Kimberly's home, Cherry agreed to tell the truth. That decision cost her everything. Kimberly was facing a child custody hearing that could result in losing her son permanently. Social workers had concerns about her parenting, and Cherry Walker had witnessed incidents that would support the state's case for removing the child from Kimberly's custody. Cherry's testimony would be devastating to Kimberly's chances of retaining parental rights. But Cherry had a problem that made her the perfect victim for someone desperate to prevent courtroom testimony. Her mental disabilities made her easy to manipulate and difficult to protect. She trusted people who showed her kindness, even when that kindness masked deadly intentions. Kimberly's solution was devastatingly simple. If Cherry couldn't testify, the state's case would be significantly weakened. If Cherry was dead, her potential testimony would never reach courtroom. Murder wasn't just Kimberly's preferred solution to her custody problems. It was her only remaining option to prevent the truth from destroying her legal case. On June 18th, Kimberly lured Cherry to a remote location under the pretense of discussing babysitting arrangements. Cherry went willingly, trusting the mother of one of the children she cared for. She had no reason to suspect that Kimberly was planning to kill her to prevent her from speaking in court. The murder revealed a level of cruelty that stunned investigators. Kimberly didn't simply kill Cherry Walker. She tortured her first, ensuring that the mentally disabled woman suffered before dying. The attack was personal and prolonged, suggesting that Kimberly was motivated by more than just preventing testimony. She seemed to enjoy the power she held over someone unable to defend herself effectively. After beating Cherry severely, Kimberly drove her to a remote county road. Cherry was still alive but critically injured, possibly conscious enough to understand what was happening to her. What came next demonstrated a level of sadistic cruelty that would convince jurors that Kimberly deserved the death penalty. Kimberly doused Cherry with lighter fluid and set her clothes on fire, burning her alive. Cherry's death wasn't quick or merciful. She died in agony, suffering burns over most of her body while conscious enough to experience the full horror of being murdered by someone she had trusted. When firefighters discovered Cherry's burned body, the investigation immediately focused on finding connections between the victim and anyone who might benefit from her death. The upcoming custody hearing provided the obvious motive, and Kimberly's relationship with Cherry through babysitting services established the opportunity. Physical evidence connected Kimberly to the crime scene. Forensic investigators found traces of accelerant on her clothing and in her vehicle. Witness testimony placed her in the area where Cherry's body was discovered. Most damaging was a clear timeline showing that Cherry's murder occurred just days before she was scheduled to testify against Kimberly in family court. Police charged Kimberly with capital murder. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that killing a witness to prevent testimony represented one of the most serious threats to the justice system possible. They emphasized Cherry's mental disabilities and vulnerability, portraying her murder as an attack on society's most defenseless members. During her trial, Kimberly maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence connecting her to Cherry's murder. Her defense attorneys argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial and that other suspects might have been responsible. They attempted to create reasonable doubt by suggesting alternative theories about Cherry's death. The jury rejected Kimberly's defense arguments. The evidence against her was too comprehensive, the motive too clear, and the cruelty too calculated to support claims of innocence. Cherry Walker had been murdered specifically to prevent her from testifying, and Kimberly was the only person who benefited from silencing that testimony. On June 7, 2012, Kimberly was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. The jury concluded that the deliberate murder of a mentally disabled witness to prevent court testimony warranted the ultimate penalty. They rejected arguments for life imprisonment, determining that Kimberly's actions threatened the fundamental functioning of the justice system. Kimberly's appeals have been repeatedly denied. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld her conviction, and subsequent federal appeals have been unsuccessful. She remains on death row in Texas, one of 6 women facing execution in the state. Cherry Walker died horribly because she agreed to tell the truth in court. Her mental disabilities made her an easy target for a woman who preferred murder to facing the consequences of her parenting failures. Kimberly Cargill transformed the custody hearing into a death sentence, proving that some people will kill to prevent their secrets from reaching the courtroom. Lisa Jo Chamberlin, The Final Betrayal. Christmas Eve, 1989. A time for family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and the warmth of loved ones coming together. In Mahoning County, Ohio, Lisa Jo Chamberlin had different plans for the holiday season. She decided that Christmas morning would be the perfect time for her boyfriend to discover her husband's murder body, transforming the most sacred family holiday into a scene of calculated betrayal that would place her among Ohio's most notorious killers. Lisa was 29 years old and trapped in what she saw as an unbearable marriage to Roger Chamberlin. Her husband was a steel worker who provided financial stability, but failed to provide the excitement Lisa craved in her life. While Roger worked long hours to support their household, Lisa was cultivating a relationship with Daryl Smith, a younger man who represented everything her marriage was not. The affair wasn't simply about romance. Lisa and Daryl were planning a future together that didn't include Roger lied to complicate their relationship. Roger's life insurance policy would provide the financial foundation for their new life, while his death would eliminate the inconvenient obstacle of Lisa's existing marriage. Lisa's plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. Christmas Eve would provide the ideal cover story. She would claim that burglars had broken into their home while she was away visiting family, killed Roger during a robbery gone wrong, and fled with valuables before she returned to discover the horrific scene. On December 24th, Lisa left their home under the pretense of visiting relatives for Christmas Eve dinner. Her alibi was carefully constructed and involved multiple family members who would testify to her whereabouts when Roger was killed. She presented herself as a devoted wife, reluctantly leaving her husband alone on Christmas Eve because he had to work the next morning. While Lisa maintained her alibi, Daryl Smith entered the Chamberlin home and attacked Roger with a baseball bat. The assault was brutal and methodical, designed to kill rather than simply injure. Roger died from multiple head injuries inflicted by someone he had never met, killed by a man who was sleeping with his wife and planning to take his place. After the murder, Daryl staged a scene to support Lisa's burglary theory. He scattered belongings around the house, took some valuable items, and left evidence suggesting forced entry. The crime scene was carefully constructed to mislead investigators and support the story Lisa would tell when she discovered her husband's body. Lisa's performance on Christmas morning was calculated to perfection. She returned home at the planned time, discovered Roger's body, and immediately called police while displaying appropriate shock and grief. Her tears appeared genuine, her trauma seemed real, and her story about burglars was detailed and consistent. But murder investigations during holiday periods received extra scrutiny, and Lisa's story quickly began unraveling under closer examination. The supposed burglary showed signs of staging that experienced investigators recognized immediately. The pattern of violence suggested personal motivation rather than random criminal activity. Most suspicious was Lisa's behavior during questioning, which seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Police launched a comprehensive investigation that revealed Lisa's affair with Daryl Smith within days of the murder. Once investigators understood the romantic and financial motives, they focused on establishing a connection between Lisa's alibi and Daryl's opportunity to commit the actual killing. Daryl Smith confessed under interrogation, providing detailed testimony about Lisa's role in planning and orchestrating Roger's murder. His confession revealed that Lisa was a mastermind who had selected the timing, chosen the method, and provided inside information necessary to make the killing appear like a burglary. Police charged Lisa with aggravated murder and conspiracy. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that the premeditated murder of a spouse for insurance money represented one of the most callous forms of betrayal possible. They emphasized the Christmas Eve timing as evidence of Lisa's complete disregard for the sanctity of family relationships. During her trial, Lisa maintained her innocence despite Daryl Smith's detailed confession implicating her as the conspiracy's architect. Her defense attorneys argued that Smith was lying to reduce his own sentence, and that Lisa was being framed by a manipulative boyfriend who had committed murder independently. The jury rejected Lisa's claims of innocence. Daryl Smith's testimony was corroborated by physical evidence, financial records showing the insurance motive, and the suspicious timing of Roger's death. Lisa's affair provided context for murder, while her elaborate alibi suggested premeditation rather than spontaneous violence. Lisa Jo Chamberlin was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to death. She became one of the few women on Ohio's death row, facing execution for orchestrating her husband's murder on Christmas Eve. Her appeals continued for years, but the evidence against her remained overwhelming. Lisa was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility on May 2, 1998. She was 48 years old and had spent nearly a decade on death row. Her final statement expressed remorse for her actions and asked for forgiveness from her victim's family. Roger Chamberlin died on Christmas Eve because his wife preferred murder to divorce, chose insurance money over marriage counseling, and selected betrayal over honest communication about her relationship problems. Lisa Jo Chamberlin transformed the most sacred family holiday into a crime scene, proving that some people will kill rather than face the complexities of ending failed relationships through legal means. 7 women, 7 death sentences, 7 cases that reveal how violence transcends age, profession, and circumstance. From Antoinette Frank's brutal secret to Brandy Holmes' predatory cruelty to Erica Sheppard's teenage brutality, these stories expose the darkest corners of human nature, where trust becomes weapon and youth offers no immunity from evil.